I'm glad to be able to share some important information with you about harm that can occur, ways for people to try to stay safe, and ways that people can get help if they've been harmed. There are a lot of feelings surrounding this heavy topic of sexual abuse, which is completely understandable. If you need to pause, take a break, or come back to this video later, that is completely okay. I hope you can do what you need to be comfortable so that we can discuss this difficult subject together. What I will present is information that's current at the time of recording. I'll discuss the methods of providing support to people who've experienced sexual abuse. These methods are developed using research done by several organizations, including the U.S. Center for Disease Control, the U.S. Department of Justice, the National Resource Center for Reaching Victims, the Office of Justice Programs, the Office for Victims of Crime, Office on Violence Against Women, and End Violence Against Women International. While there may be other ways that organizations or individuals may feel it's best to support individuals and families that are impacted by abuse, these best practices presented today are evidence-based, trauma-informed, and survivor-centered. As I mentioned, there is a valid fear you may have about relationships as well as harm that can occur. For us to learn about it, we have to face that fear and acknowledge that learning about it may be somewhat difficult. If we can put aside our disbelief for a moment while we take in this information, we may realize that doing so helps us know what to watch out for and how to stay safe or get help. It can take some time to learn and to understand this information, which is okay. Sometimes we may need help to understand things we don't know, which is why this training can be a guide for yourself or someone who may have already experienced sexual abuse. Usually, we spend a lot of time teaching people about how to do daily tasks in life, for instance, like toileting. But often we don't spend very much time having folks understand their bodies, that people should have control over who touches their bodies, or even accurate name for body parts to help us understand why these are just as important life lessons. I'll go over how our lack of knowing these can lead to greater risk of harm. Later, I'll talk about some important resources should harm occur. I'll explain what consent is and give you some examples of what consent is and is not. We will talk about how acknowledging someone's ability to take risks ultimately helps preserve their dignity and helps empower them to make good choices. At the end of today's discussion, I'll go over the things that people can do to support themselves or others after experiencing sexual abuse. Now we'll discuss what sexual abuse means, what are some important things to know about it, and some information about how it affects people with IDD. The terms sexual assault, sexual violence, and sexual abuse are often used interchangeably, though it may be more common to hear one versus another in certain circumstances. Sexual violence is commonly used when referencing violence on a global scale or talking about the continuum of sexual violence. Sexual abuse is more commonly used when talking about the sexual assault of children, youth, and vulnerable adults. Sexual assault occurs when a person is forced, coerced, and/or manipulated into any unwanted sexual activity. Sexual assault is an umbrella term that includes a wide range of victimizations, which may or may not involve force or be illegal. The dynamics of sexual assault are complicated. Typically, sexual assault is not about sex, but about manipulation, exploitation, and exerting power and control over another person. Sexual assault is a tool of sexism or sexist oppression, and perpetrators use sexual assault as a weapon to humiliate and dominate others. There is no one kind of person who experiences sexual assault. We know that sexual assault affects people from a wide variety of backgrounds. The stories and statistics show us that sexual assault crosses boundaries of disabilities, race, class, culture, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, and sexuality. Perpetrators use sexual assault as a tool of oppression. People who identify as members of oppressed or marginalized communities experience the intersections of sexual violence and that other oppression, for example, like racism, homophobia, or ableism, as well as greater rates of sexual sexual assault. People who identify as members of oppressed or marginalized communities experience the intersections of sexual violence and other oppression, like racism, homophobia, or ableism, as well as greater rates of sexual assault. You will hear me use the terms survivor or victim used to describe someone who's experienced sexual violence. While victim is a legal term, survivor can cast a more empowered lens on living through sexual violence. You'll hear me use these terms interchangeably, but the best practice is to let those who've experienced it decide how they identify. One of the most important understandings of sexual violence is that it's never the survivor's fault, no matter what. While these statistics may be shocking, they're important facts about the possibility of harm. People with disabilities are nearly 4 times more likely than others to be victims of violent crime. People with IDD are also at an increased risk of experiencing sexual violence, nearly 7 times greater than those without IDD. It may surprise you to learn that the person who sexually abused them is usually not a stranger, but actually someone they already know. About 20% of all women are sexually abused during their lifetimes. However, nearly 68% of women with intellectual and developmental disabilities will be abused before they're 18 years of age, and up to 90% of them will experience these crimes over the course of their lives. You may be curious as to who would sexually abuse someone with IDD. Well, as I mentioned, people who sexually abuse are more often known to the person they abuse. From the data available at the time of recording, 58% of folks are known to the individual versus 42% of these folks are unknown to them. Within that 58%, 33% are friends or acquaintances, or sometimes caregivers. 14% are related to the individual by blood or marriage, and 11% are personal, intimate partner relationships. Why do you think most people who sexually abuse a person with IDD are known to the survivor? Well, there are a number of reasons, but mostly because it can go undetected or hidden in plain sight. Most people don't suspect someone who's a relative, friend, caregiver, or intimate partner to cause sexual abuse, so it goes unnoticed. People with IDD often experience intense isolation and may not disclose or choose to hide their abuse for fear of losing the few connections they have. It is very common for victims to try to protect the person causing harm and also to blame themselves for the abuse. So why are people with IDD at higher risk than those without IDD? Well, it's often the case that people with IDD are taught to do what others around them tell them to do, not just in childhood, but throughout their whole lives. Others are usually taught to obey their boss at their job, their teacher at school, their doctors, and others in positions of authority. People with IDD are sometimes not taught about what sex is, what sexual acts are, or even the real names for their body parts. Others are often taught about human growth and development, or sometimes called sex ed or sexual education, which includes descriptions of sex and physical anatomy. Lastly, some people with IDD are treated as though they can't or should not have adult human experiences, like sex and relationships, while others are pretty much expected to have intimate partner relationships and sex. Teaching them to say no and giving choice is empowering. People with IDD are not children as they enter adulthood. How are they going to say no to someone if they've never done it or known that it's okay? Let's take a look at some potential things that could mean someone has experienced sexual abuse. First, maybe someone's usual behavior or emotional demeanor just seems off. They're not their usual selves. Maybe a routine they usually do is off, or they don't want to do some things they once enjoyed. Maybe they become more reserved or shut off, not wanting others in. Maybe they avoid interactions or conversations, or maybe they do the opposite and start trying to get more attention. People react in many different ways after being sexually abused. Someone could be experiencing hypervigilance, which means that everything around them is a source of fear, or they have an intense reaction or response. Perhaps they're more annoyed by things that only used to mildly annoy them, or maybe they don't want to do things they used to. Someone could start making choices they hadn't previously, like drinking, using drugs, or harming oneself. Maybe someone feels like bad things that happen are now somehow their fault. Sometimes people try to focus on the past and the way they were before they experienced sexual abuse. This could look like being even more focused on their usual routine and being more upset than usual if something happens that disrupts it. Maybe someone can't put down their phone or can't stop looking at social media platforms like Facebook or Instagram, or they worry about missing a message. It could be that they've been harassed online, or that someone has used a naked photo they shared with them to share to others without their permission. While looking through all of these signs, that it really could be overwhelming or uncomfortable for us to consider that sexual abuse may be a reality. Our fears can be so extreme to the point that we ignore or delude ourselves that we shouldn't pay attention to those signs or to recognize if they are present. Our own wants and hopes for the positive and safety can impact our perception of the truth and can result in us talking ourselves out of the likelihood of harm. Again, we must remain both non-judgmental or objective and curious about things before believing or assuming it is or isn't happening. After hearing about what sexual violence is, how pervasive it is within the IDD community, and possible signs of it occurring, you may be asking yourself, well, what can be done? How do we help someone who's experienced sexual abuse? Well, we'll go over the following topics. First, things to teach people with IDD to try to prevent it from occurring in the first place. Second, what basics we can teach others about having healthy relationships. Third, ways to be able to talk about sexual abuse in a way that supports someone to identify it if it happens. Fourth, understanding how consent is a key component of safety within relationships. Fifth, how we can support someone to make their own choices and see that there is dignity in risk. And finally, ways people can access supports to navigate their chosen relationships. One of the methods we can start to teach about ways to keep people safe is the idea of good touch and bad touch. We can teach people that good touch makes you feel good but doesn't hurt you and is something you want. Bad touch makes you feel bad. It can hurt you and is something you don't want. If we start with those two concepts, we can see how this can be applied to relationships. In good touch, someone asks you for permission before touching you. If you say that you don't want to be touched, this person just doesn't touch you. Good touch should make you feel comfortable. On the opposite side, bad touch in relationships looks like when someone doesn't ask for permission and just touches you. If you tell someone to stop touching you and they don't stop, that is bad touch. Bad touch also makes you feel uncomfortable. This is just one way to identify healthy or unhealthy behavior in a relationships. What makes a relationship healthy? Well, things that are healthy are good for you. Exercise, eating whole foods like fruits and vegetables, and drinking plenty of water are all behaviors that are generally good for you. Similarly, relationships can have things that are good for you, which are healthy, or bad for you, which are unhealthy. Healthy relationships maintain trust, respect, and choice between each person in that relationship. Unhealthy relationships may not observe trust, respect, or choice in one of the people in that relationship. Healthy relationships have people who respect each person's boundaries and personal space. Boundaries include things you say no to or things that you've expressed you won't do. You may consider them as your personal rules on how you want to be treated or respected. However, boundaries aren't rules that limit the other person's choices unless it has a direct impact on you. For instance, telling someone they can't go somewhere isn't a boundary, that's just bossing them around. An example of a boundary would be that you don't want someone to yell at you. Personal space means that each person deserves to not be touched, to have some time alone if they want, or that there's some room around them where others don't invade. Unhealthy relationships are one in which one person may not listen to someone who tells them their boundaries or doesn't follow their instruction when they tell them to stop. Unhealthy relationships also may not respect that each person has their personal space in which others don't have the right to invade. In healthy relationships, each person understands that they get to make their own decisions and doesn't try to make the decisions for the other person. In unhealthy relationships, one person may try to control the actions of the other person. This person may try to make decisions for that other person. They may try to say the other person can't talk to a specific individual or to go see someone because they're jealous of those interactions. This is unhealthy behavior. When you're supporting folks, it's important to stay curious and non-judgmental about their choices and decisions. Having open, non-judgmental discussions about others' intentions and the consistency of those intentions can be vital for folks to choose who they want to include in their lives. What can speak louder to them than friendships or relationships they may choose is the consistency of your support. You have that power to be there for them as they navigate challenges in that relationship and validate their autonomy of their choices and bodies. You play an important part in their network of support. It's crucial to recognize and honor the influence you hold within their lives. Now we'll define what trust, respect, and choice involve. One of those components of healthy relationships is trust. Trust means that you genuinely believe the other person will do what's right by you. All relationships involve trust. Trust takes time. You have to get to know someone before you can trust them. Getting to know someone takes time. You figure out who you can trust by their actions. People who you can trust keep their promises. People you can trust tell the truth. People you can trust stick up for friends and family. People you can trust don't cheat. People you can trust don't steal. Respect is showing that you care about people. When you respect someone else, you show them that you care about their thoughts, feelings, and interests. When someone respects you, they show you that they care about your thoughts, feelings, and interests. You figure out if someone respects you by how they talk to you. Someone who respects you listens to what you have to say. Someone who respects you wants you to be happy. Someone who respects you asks how you feel. Someone who respects you tells you how they feel. A relationship that is healthy is a relationship that respects that each person gets to make their own choices. Sometimes choices will be made together, like what activity to do or what movie to watch. In a healthy relationship, you still get to make your own choices, like which friends you get to hang out with, what foods you like, or how you spend your time. If each person wants different things, you must find a way to compromise. That means that each of you gets to make a choice that both of you might enjoy. In healthy relationships, no one gets bossed around. Choice includes autonomy and self-determination. Autonomy is the ability to do things on your own. Self-determination means everyone has the right to make decisions for themselves based on respect for the principle of equal rights and fair equality of opportunity. Now that we've covered the aspects of healthy and unhealthy relationships, let's look at the different types of relationships. This includes family, professionals, friends, and intimate partners. Family includes folks like moms, dads, brothers, sisters, grandmas, grandpas, and others. We don't get to choose our family. They want us to be safe and healthy. Sometimes they tell us not to do things because they do want us to be safe. Professionals. A professional is someone who is paid to interact with you. For example, could be a job coach, a bus driver, a doctor, a social worker, or others. They can be friendly and may even seem like friends. They aren't friends, however, because they don't get to choose to interact with you. Your friends and intimate partners are the kinds of relationships who get to choose to be with you. Friends. So friends choose to hang out with you, but both of you don't want intimacy. Intimate partnerships. Intimate partners choose to hang out with you, and both of you want more than just friendship. You get to choose who you want as friends or partners, but they aren't family or professionals. In friends or intimate partners, both people need to want to be in these kinds of relationships for it to work out. So now that we've covered chosen relationships like friends and intimate partners, let's talk about consent. Consent can be thought of as permission to do something. Before any physical contact with the other person, like hugging, kissing, or having sex, you should ask for permission and check to make sure that the other person consents